what we're looking at here is a little bit of movement analysis for like a sidestep kind of maneuver, and we'd use kind of a sidestep if we were going to change direction or if we were moving laterally. And it's one of these positions that I think you need to get the mechanics right. And what we've looked at here was just trying to reduce, say, maybe ACL injury risk, something that we see can happen with lateral movement and lateral cutting, etc. And if we go to the first top piece, what I want to look at is how the gentleman here goes and laterally steps in and where the major points of movement are. So if we see that lateral cut and we take it all the way over there, and then I get the little tool thing up and have a little bit of a look at the angle we've got going on. If I make that angle there, we can see that that's probably not the best angle I've ever drawn. But if we go into there and then we draw the next angle up, we can see that's a pretty extreme angle. And if the little tool thing worked quite as it should do, then we'd get an angle out of that. But it's quite easy to see that that's quite an extreme angle that we're seeing. And these are fairly approximate angles that we're trying to create. If we look a little bit lower at the bottom, what we can start to see after a little bit of coaching and also some movement changes to the hip. So we looked at increasing control and a little bit of range of movement in a abducted position at the hip. We can see we get a lot less movement at both the foot and a lot less movement at the knee as well, and more of the movement is coming from the hip. And as we can go in there, and I'm going to take it all the way to the end there, and we'll get the little doodah up, and we see the angle there. And I don't know quite why it hasn't drawn the angle for me, but we see the angle is much less extreme. And again, that's quite rudimentary, but the angle, is much less extreme. There's much less movement coming through the knee. So if we think about kind of the angle there on top, we see there's a lot of movement through the knee joint. And if we see here, you can see there's a lot less movement through the knee joint. And even just without the lines, visually, we can see a difference in the movement. So the one on the top is much more of a kind of vertical collapse, and we're seeing the right ankle right at end range, we're seeing the right knee right at end range, and the hip joint moving a little bit more vertically, as we can see there, the gentleman dropping down vertically. On the other side, what we actually start to see is much more of a lateral movement. We're seeing that left knee on the bottom picture moving through a decent range of movement laterally. On the other side, we're just kind of seeing this vertical collapse. And again, all of the force on the top picture is kind of being forced through that left knee. And these are quite simple adjustments to make. So it's about looking at the movement pattern that you're trying to change. It's about looking at the joints and their contributions, and then it's about trying to change that, whether that's actually through skill and available range of movement or actually coordination of the motor pattern within itself. So I look at it from both perspectives, that I might want to increase capacity in an area such as the hip that's not getting a great deal of movement, versus trying to actually decrease through skill and coaching how we go about performing the movement. And the top one and the bottom one are kind of a little bit like night and day. Certainly from an injury prevention perspective, I think the top one would be far more likely, if we repeated that pattern at speed and in a game, to result in some kind of injury to the ACL as mechanics, rather than the bottom one. And what we have to remember is that mechanics and skill go hand in hand. So actually my movement skill can sometimes dictate my mechanics. I think mechanics sometimes feel a little divorced from movement skill. But in this situation, understanding the pattern to begin with, then looking at the contribution of different joints to the pattern, and then trying to change that through available range of movement and integration into a relevant skill.